from Los Angeles, 11:20 in the morning, 8:20 in Paris, 9:20 in Tel Aviv. I'm filled with deep gratitude and deep pride for the work that we've done together this past year and for the work we'll do together in the year to come. As Albert and Orna said, you are the bedrock of our community, and I'm so deeply proud to lead you in this trying time. I'm also really excited to have this conversation with two extraordinary leaders of the Jewish people. And I'll say that I'm looking down at bios because even when you know someone well, you want to make sure you introduce them in the way that they deserve. And you saw this great video of our work in Israel, and our closest, deepest historic partner in our work in Israel and in the global Jewish world is the Jewish Agency, led by my dear friend and a great leader, Isaac Bougie Herzog. And I'm going to read his bio, some of it, just because you should know who we're talking to. First of all, he's been chairman of the executive since 2018, and I would tell you, an extraordinary 2 years of leadership, probably the greatest leadership that the Jewish Agency has seen since its beginning. He's also the son of the sixth president of the state of Israel, Chaim Herzog, the grandson of Israel's first chief rabbi, the nephew of Abba Eben, and before that, he was close to being the prime minister of the state of Israel. He has held numerous positions in the government. He has made a marketable impact on the state of Israel and will continue to for years to come. We're also joined, I'm very, very excited, by one of the most important voices in Europe today, and frankly, one of the most important progressive voices in the Jewish world, Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur, who is a founding member of Kerem, the Council of French-Speaking Liberal Rabbis. She's the author of several books, including a book I encourage you to get that's coming out very soon called Anti-Semitism Revisited. She was born in France. At one time, she was going to be a doctor. We're really actually happy that she's healing the Jewish people more than she's healing individuals. She studied for 5 years at the Rabbinical Seminary, HUC, and was ordained in 2008. And as I said, she's an extraordinary leader in Europe and in the Jewish world. I welcome them to this conversation. Good evening, my dear friends and leaders. When we started this year, the Jewish Federation said that even though we're still in the midst of this pandemic, we were going to focus on the Jewish future. That in fact, that if we didn't look forward even in this pandemic, the community would suffer. So I want to ask you, as we begin this conversation, about what you are seeing today before we start to talk about the future. And I'll start with you, Bougie. Obviously, the video shows what's going on in Israel. You have a worldview as well. What are you seeing today in terms of the challenges that the Jewish people are facing?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Jay. This is an extraordinary event. I want to thank all the participants of the Hineni group. You are a group of Jewish leaders who care, and you have no idea how much your support of the Federation has impact that sends its messages all around the world. That's what keeps us unique as a nation, as the Jewish nation. So thank you wholeheartedly. Thank you, Albert, and of course, thank you, Orna, and especially I want to welcome my really good friend, Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur. She is not only an extraordinary voice, you should know that her writings and books are the most popular and effective content that is coming out today in Europe. And I wish in the United States it will resonate as well. You will see for yourself. As for your question, I lead the biggest Jewish organization in the world, a major partner of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. So we attend to the needs of Jews all over the world. We operate in 66 countries. Our main aims are three: Aliyah, of course, and encouraging Jews to find their home in Israel. Secondly, and actually the important item on our agenda is connecting Jews to one another and to the state of Israel. That's by major experiences and our shlichim and shinim, such as in Los Angeles. And finally, impacting and bringing your voice to the State of Israel, voice of pluralism, and of course, supporting Israeli society, as you just have seen. And I must say that the biggest challenge that the COVID era has created is impacting communal life, Jewish communal life. We, through our unique emergency loan fund to communities around the world, literally saved 75 communities who have collapsed. And the reason that communities collapsed is because there's no minyan, there's no gathering, there's no ability to meet, and there's no financial model that holds communities. And you're talking about communities who may be there for thousands or hundreds of years. And all of a sudden, they're total paralysis. So much so that we needed to send emergency supplies to community. So that is one major challenge. The next major challenge is Jewish education. How do you keep Jewish education moving on forward, and how do you connect when you don't have immersive experiences, you don't have birthright, you're limited in travel, you don't have summer camps? These are major questions. And finally, the issue of security. Clearly, we see in the social networks especially, but not only, a rise in hate and anti-Semitism, threats of violence, and other events which you have seen also in your country. And therefore, these are major, major challenges that only if we work together, we can meet them together.
Thanks, Bushi. Rabbi, before the pandemic, everybody was concerned about the future of European Jewry. I'm wondering how you're feeling today, from your vantage point, how the Jewish community in Paris and in France is doing, and what you're seeing are the challenges that we're facing today.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for this invitation. I'm so thrilled I can take part in this conversation between America, Europe, and Israel. I'm just like many of you, I feel this very strong ga'agua, we say in Hebrew, this very strong sense of nostalgia for the ability to see. I have to share with you, I developed in recent months a tradition with my kids, with my children, that every week we pretend we are traveling to another place in the world, so that we feel somehow that we reconnect to the journeys and travels we cannot do. So this weekend, to tell you the truth, we were on the Normandy beaches near Omaha beaches, walking on the beaches of France, and we pretended we were in Tel Aviv. So it feels that somehow we're trying through imagination still to activate something that our Jewish tradition defines as very precious. You know, some commentators say that actually the word Adam, humanity, Adam, has something to do with dimion, the possibility to, imaginate, to be in the process of imagination. And this is exactly, I feel what we need today to reactivate our capacity to imaginate and to project. I feel that in the year we just experienced, I'm going to share maybe a personal experience. I feel that this crisis we went through changed my feeling of spaces. Eshel says that Judaism is a civilization built in time. But I do think that in the past year, we changed our relationship to space in a very powerful and actually critical manner. A few months ago, I felt, and maybe you have the same experience, I felt a few months ago that we could feel very, very close through our technology, through our screens. We could feel very, very close to people who were on the other side of the world, even though we would feel very far away from our neighbors. In our lockdowns, we know we were not able to know what was going on in the next neighborhood, but we knew exactly what was going on in Israel and in America. But I feel, and I don't know if you feel the same in Israel and in America, that something changed in the past month or weeks. And suddenly there is a threat that we might feel very, very far away from each other, because somehow we are so connected today to our local policies, to what happens in our different countries. It must be the case in America, where the election just took place. It's probably the case in Israel, where the vaccination and immunization process stands in a different rhythm than ours in Europe. And so it seems that we're somehow threatened by a renewed perception but I think it's something we really need to consider today. I was watching the news, and I would be really curious afterwards to hear Bougie's reaction maybe about that or his feeling. But I was watching the news today, watching the images coming from Israel of this large funeral in the ultra-Orthodox world, thousands of people in Jerusalem. And I was thinking, I'm not commenting on that now, but I was thinking of comparing this to what happened to the Jewish community in France. We have images coming from Israel of part of the Jewish population who refuses to submit to some governmental decisions. And I feel that in France, Jews are perceived very often as being very submitted to governmental decision. I'm going to give you a very short example of that, maybe, because I think it's meaningful. In the past month, the government in France, just like everywhere else, announced that theaters and movie places and cultural places would be closed. And some people in France, and I'm sure you're not going to be surprised by that, said, why are churches and mosques and synagogues still open while theaters and movie places are not open? When we consider in a way that culture is our religion, why can't we worship in our theaters when you worship in synagogues and churches? And they did call religious leaders, asking them, would you accept us in your places of worship to, for example, screen a movie or whatever. And for me, it was interesting that many churches offer their spaces as a kind of rebellion against governmental decisions, but no synagogue offered that. And it said something about the way French Jews in recent years felt they had to be very because they felt that their security depended so much upon the state and governmental decision. There was no way we would go against a global decision. What I'm trying to express through these comparisons and this little anecdote is that actually the way we behave in this crisis says a lot about the different ways of being Jewish or of experiencing our Jewish identity in this context of crisis. And I definitely feel that more than ever, we need to learn from each other's experience and maybe to teach each other new experiences. So I'm aware that through everything that I said, I'm not answering your question, which is a very rabbinic thing to do. As you know, rabbis never answer questions they ask. So your question was more about, I guess, the situation in France, and you won't be surprised me telling you that indeed the situation has been very tough in the recent years, but I think it's been pretty difficult all over the world. And I do believe, and Jewish leader here, I'm surrounded by people who are really deeply engaged in an attempt to imagine a future for them in France. Obviously, French Jews are very, very attached, and more than ever, I would say, to Israel and the security and the existence of Israel. But at the same time, they are really engaged in building a future for their children here.
Look, I think that I appreciate that, and I appreciate you acknowledging how rabbis answer questions. I think what we're really seeing right now is, right, we become more global because we can do what we're doing right now, right? We can have a live conversation with Tel Aviv and Paris and Los Angeles, and we weren't doing that before in the same way we're doing it. And obviously the bridge, as you said, Rabbi, between Israel and the diaspora is a very, very essential bridge. But I think we would all agree that that bridge was challenged before COVID. And I'm wondering how we feel, Bougie, Rabbi, about I want to know what we're going to do to strengthen that bridge, to build on that bridge, to make sure that every Jew feels comfortable walking across that bridge, no matter where they live, no matter where they pray, no matter how they think, whether they go to the movies instead of shul. I wanted us to talk about that because I want us to come out of this pandemic stronger than we were when we entered into it.
Well, look, your question is really fascinating, because I believe part of the discussion that was pre-COVID was that there was no a gray area. It was either this camp or that camp. Okay, it was either this stream or that stream. And there's so much overlap, and there's so much common denominators, and there's so many interesting things that are happening. This era is a transformative era. Things are changing dramatically. And the proportion in life that you allot to certain things has changed. I truly feel, I know that there are a lot of tensions. Rabbi Horvilleur just mentioned, the pictures of a huge funeral in Jerusalem, of a huge rabbi, of huge magnitude. But on the other hand, these are my brothers and sisters. They're part of my nation. And I believe that under this canopy, we should have as many as possible. For me, we are serving as a bridge with all types of Jewish groups and individuals. It's fascinating what we see. It's fascinating the issues that come to our doorstep from communities all over the world. We started COVID with the Italian Jewish community. Now, hardly many of you know much about the Italian Jewish community. It's the oldest community on earth. It's since Roman times. And they have 22 communities of about 20,000 people all told. And they were literally devastated. And when I spoke to the leader of the community, I called her immediately. She started crying. She said, except for the Holocaust, we never had such a bad experience. Now, this gives you a proportion of how bad it was, with casualties and deaths, no food and hygiene products, no emergency hotlines and things like that. The fact that somebody calls up from Israel, the fact that we raised money in the Israeli public, the fact that we could supply her immediate support with the aid also of the Jewish Federations of North America, which you're part of, is something in my mind mystical. The fact that somebody out there is there to help. And indeed, that's what we do. We all care for our brothers and sisters all over the world. We care for what's happening in the Jewish world, and we want to make sure that our children understand it as well. They're all inundated with COVID. And then the question is, how do you deliver that message when somebody's attention span is very limited? Clearly, these are interesting days, and I actually feel that the more we are distant, the more we want to know more and ask more questions. And I feel it's an opportunity. It's not only something negative, it's also something positive. I will end with another example, is the fact that we have an incredible rise in demand for Aliyah to Israel. Now you would say to yourself, with all the problems, and a million people unemployed, despite the fact that we are very impressive on the vaccination, but the truth of the matter is it has nothing to do with economy per se. It has to do with the feeling of being a part of something big that we're all feeling.
Yeah, I think it's what Bougie is saying is very powerful and so true. I think it's the exact expression of this Talmudic concept, Kol Israel Arevim ze leze, that the entire people, the Jewish people, is supposed to be a caution for each other, a guarantee for each other. And I think that we feel it. We feel the need for this arevut probably more than ever. I was lucky enough to spend many years in Israel and many years in the United States, and now I'm back in France. And I have to say that what I learned from this journey and this travel is that very often, unfortunately, we tend to judge each other And very often what threatens our arevut, our ability to care for each other, is the idea that one of us feels more authentically Jewish than the other. I think there's nothing worse in identity than to convince yourself that somehow you're more authentic than the other. And I think that this crisis should remind us how much we are interconnected, and this notion of authenticity or purity of Jewish identity somewhere is kind of meaningless. You know, I feel in this crisis like a will to use even like medical or biological notions. We are who we are because we have been contaminated by our encounter with others. I mean, I personally can testify that my rabbinate, but also my way of being, has everything to do with that. I encountered Israeli Jewry and I encountered American Jewry, and I was nourished by European Jewry. And somehow it created in me a capacity to process, you know, the richness of these experiences. And I think this is what we need to make sure wouldn't be threatened in this hopefully post-COVID world tomorrow. We need to be able to cherish this arevut zeleze, this commitment toward each other, and keep an ability also to sometimes criticize each other, interrogate each other. You know, as I'm talking to you, as you can see, there is a David Ben Gurion upon my head. I don't know if you see that on your screen. In my living room, we have a picture of David Ben Gurion just above my head. And, you know, David Ben Gurion used to live in this famous place in the Negev, Sde Boker, the field of the morning, something like this. And Boker in Hebrew also means bikoret. It means the ability to criticize. So I feel somehow we should be able all together to live in a field of criticism, but powerful and well intended criticism.
And I think, look, we're in relationship. I tell people all the time that, you know, that's really what we are. We're in relationship. And when you're in relationship, in a good relationship, you're able to tell each other what you feel and what you disagree with, right? So, you know, the hope is that we have a deep relationship, the diaspora does with the state of Israel. The question really is, how do we deepen it and how do we listen to each other better? Because I think one of the challenges we have in Jewish life is we're really good at talking to each other. We're not always good at listening to each other.
That's true. You're absolutely right. And by the way, let's just remind Delphine that Sde Boker is exactly where you got your Zionism from, Jay. That's a different story, but all of your listeners and viewers should know that Jay met David Ben Gurion at the age of 14 in Sde Boker, and that impacted his life. But truly speaking, what we have is two major Jewish communities, about 6.5 million Jews in Israel and 6.5 million Jews in North America, and a few millions in the rest of the world. And the question is, how do they get to know each other? Because they're totally distorted images on both sides of the ocean. We are focusing heavily on teaching Israelis what we call peoplehood, trying to explain to them what Jewish life means abroad and how does Jewish life function abroad. And we're trying our best to introduce what Israel is all about all over the world, and on campuses, in communities, in schools and the like, because it's simply not what you read in certain media outlets, which are, in my mind, distorting the richness and the multifaceted nature of each side of the communities. For example, there's a huge lack of knowing Israeli culture and arts in communities abroad, or what it has to, I mean, it only goes to politics, war and peace, and things of this nature, but nothing dealing with what is the Jewish civilization that we produce in Israel, as well as Israelis are locked down into their own kind of fenced type of society without understanding what it is which holds Jews abroad in communities and how proud they are of Israel. So, and also have what criticism they have on Israel. So that we have a duty to teach and educate as much as we can in order to create the basis for further contact.
Rabbi, I'm curious because you're known in the world and certainly in France as a person who has really been committed to inclusivity, right, and openness in the way that we think about being Jewish. Unfortunately, on some level, inclusivity and progressive thinking has been politicized, certainly in America and other places. But Jewishly, when you think about the opening up of the Jewish community and thinking about being Jewish, how are you looking at that now from your French point of view, and how is that really growing in France? I think we've heard for a long time that denominational life outside of the United States is challenged, even in Israel. So what are you seeing in terms of that? Because that is a big part of your pulpit, right?
Yes, France particularly is known as Jewishly as a more conservative country, and it has to do with the way French Jewry is historical heritage. Also, just maybe 1 minute of French Jewish history for our audience. About 200 years ago, Napoleon decided to create what is called in French a consistoire, which is a centralized body that is supposed to speak in the name of the France. And at the top of this consistoire was placed a chief rabbi, supposedly speaking for all the Jews of France. This was a very strategic move for Napoleon to make sure he would be able to have only person to talk to. But this move went totally against the possibility to develop true pluralism in France, religious pluralism. Because if you believe that one person can speak in the name of the group, then somehow you tend to erase other voices in the group. And this is more or less what happens. And it's particularly difficult to do in a Jewish group. I always have in mind this sentence from Amos Oz, the Israeli writer. Amos Oz used to say that we, the Jews, can never agree with a sentence that starts with the words, we, the Jews. And I think it's pretty true. We, the Jews, can never agree with a sentence that starts with we, the Jews. But this is what Napoleon tried to force in France, and somehow it worked, meaning that French Jewry developed toward a kind of monolithic voice, and it was not really easy, but it changed in recent years. But I would say that for years there was only an attempt of a monolithic religious Jewish voice in France. And today, I think it's not true anymore. I think there is much more pluralism today in France. I'm blessed to lead a congregation, quite a large congregation in Paris. 1,500 families are members of my congregation, and it's probably one of the largest synagogues in Paris. And I lead a Bet Midrash called Tenou'a. We have also a magazine and a Bet Midrash. And every month we have hundreds and hundreds of people joining our Bet Midrash. It's quite interesting, particularly since we started to move this Bet Midrash to a video conference. Now we do it through Zoom or another technology. We noticed that we are joined by hundreds of people who are non-Jews, non-Jewish people who decide to study with us. And I think it says something about this will of people to really to learn from each other. So it's true that I particularly tried through my books and my lectures here in France and in Europe to open the gates of Jewish knowledge and to think of how we can enter in a discussion, not only with Muslims and Christians, but also with other disciplines. You know, what can we learn from each other's expertise today? I think this is something that we all feel we should do somehow. I feel that today I beneficiate a lot in, you know, when I'm able to talk more with the historians and scientists and consider what this crisis can teach us, and how a dialogue between our disciplines is something that can help us grow in this time when each one of us feels so unlocked. in its own universe, in its own world.
So I started this conversation with wanting to talk about the future. And I think everybody on this call knows that I have a specific personal interest in the future, since this is my last year in leading the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. So I want to make sure that the future is strong. But both of you are committed to the future as well. And when you're thinking about the future, for me, I want to be optimistic. So let's talk about what we have to be optimistic about the future of Jewry in Europe, in Israel, and the future of the Jewish people. And I'll start with you, Bougie. Tell us why you are optimistic, and tell us why we should be optimistic.
Because I have a sense of proportion. And it says, "Da me'ain ata ba u'le'an ata holech." It says our forefathers said, know where you come from and where you're heading to. My late father, Chaim Herzog, wrote in his biography, his last paragraph, is that he always believed in the eternity of Israel, the Jewish people, and the need to serve this purpose. And as you look in history, you see where we were and where we're at now. There's always great challenges. There's always great conflicts. There are always great risks. And the Jewish people endured catastrophes. But I do believe that we are in an era where Israel is very impressive, where the Jewish people in relative terms, no Jew is under, very few Jews are under huge risk. And those who are under huge risk are taken care of by organizations such as ours. And there's something to look up to as an impressive nation and communities all throughout. What always brought us to the abyss was strife from within. And we have a huge challenge, not only to have a dialogue, even an argument, but under the realms of a certain dignified conversation, but also we have a duty to get to know all other parts of Judaism. I'm trying my best to educate Israelis about all facets of Judaism, including I'm going to the most, polarized leaders of all groups in the country. And I'm trying to do it also abroad. I'm worried about something which we can devote another evening to, and that is a streak of, very extreme groups in the Jewish world who are buying a certain place under the limelights, whose voices, only undermine Israel's cause, Israel's case, undermine anybody else, the Orthodox, the this, the that. And of course, on the other side, ultra-Orthodox or the extreme nature who undermine not only Israel, but all other groups. These two polars cannot be the center. The big center of our nation wants to know each other, and we have to make sure that that's the bridge which we tread.
Thank you. Rabbi, more wisdom, please.
Well, I'm also tend to be optimistic, but the Hebrew word for crisis, mashber, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, comes from a root. Mashber, it means a birthing stool. Mashber is literally the place, a crisis is literally the place in the Bible where something new could be born. And just like a birthing room, labor room, it's scary, but at the same time, it's full of hope. And this is exactly where we stand. In the past weeks, I've been thinking a lot about the way our Chazal, or rabbis, journeyed through crisis and their capacity to be creative and adaptive to different crises. And I keep thinking about this simple example, the fact that in synagogues we read the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays. And the Talmud explains that why do we read Torah on Mondays and Thursdays? That's because those days were days of market, shuk, like there was a market in the city on that day. And the rabbis always knew that you never asked people to come to the Torah, but the Torah should come to where they are. And I think as Jewish leaders, we always need, and especially in a time of crisis, we need to ask, where is the market? Meaning not marketing, but meaning where do people stand? Where are their needs? Where can we find them? And this is exactly what you're doing. This is exactly what it means to say ineni, to say, I'm going to be there where you stand.
So we're towards the end of our at the end of our conversation. We in the COVID world of Zoom, I learned a long time ago that if you keep people on a Zoom too long, it's a little troubling. So last statements by both of you. I want to first of all thank you both. I don't want to just thank you for being here with us in Los Angeles today, but I want to thank you for being beacons of Jewish life. The truth of the matter is I'm optimistic because of the two of you. I'm optimistic because some of the most creative, passionate, dynamic people are leading the Jewish people. I'm optimistic because I know our best days are ahead of us, and I think that's what we feel like in Los Angeles. So last words, Bougie, and I'm going to have to give the very last word to the rabbi because that's the way I was brought up.
That's okay. I'm actually, I actually am a big fan of the rabbi, so it goes perfectly well. First of all, I'm optimistic because the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles is one of the best in the world. Let's just say so and be very proud of it. And I want to thank you, Jay and Albert and the entire team for what you're doing in leading this very impressive community. And it's a community which I would always remember when I was there pre-COVID, where I met a group of rabbis of all denominations together in the home of Consul General Mr. Newman, and I was very happy to see that event together under the same roof, saying, "Ine matov u'manayim," everybody together. Now, final word is, guys, we have to think about the day after. The day after poses a lot of issues pertaining to the way we manage our Jewish life. A lot of it will be on these platforms. We're working now day in, day out to produce new platforms, to be able to deliver contents, to do things that we never imagined. For example, this kind of event we would never have imagined, and you guys would have flown me to Los Angeles because I couldn't have even offered you a satellite video, and now we're on Zoom. So I think a lot of things, a lot of assumptions in life have to change, whilst the basics are that we are members of a unique nation, a small nation and family of nations, unique nations, that its secret of success and ability to sustain itself is if it is together despite differences. And thank you all, and shalom from Israel.
Rabbi?
Well, I don't have a lot to add. Just yesterday we read, synagogues Beshalach, this moment in the Torah where the sea opens in front of us, and as a people we're able to cross toward a new future. So I think it's a powerful image to carry with us. I can't wait for the moment the sea will open and I'll be able to come to Los Angeles. So that would be my tour. I hope I'll be able soon to visit the two of you where in Israel and in America. It's a pleasure to be with you from Paris tonight.
Thank you very much. We wish that too. By the way, just so you know, before COVID, we had a trip planned. The Federation had a trip planned to France and to Israel. And this is the closest we're getting right now. But soon the day will come where we'll be on an airplane and we will see you, not just in Los Angeles, you'll see us, but we'll see you in France and in Israel. Toda Rabah, Litrot. Thank you very much. I now turn back. By the way, looking at the Zoom screen, I can't talk to all of you. It's so nice to see everybody on this wonderful Sunday. I hope you enjoyed your pancakes and your coffee, and which by the way, I am not eating any of those things, but that's another story. I am wearing a suit for the first time in 11 months, and it feels weird, but I'm happy to put the suit back on. Thank you all. Deep gratitude and pride for the work we're doing together, and it's now my privilege to turn it back to my real partner and friend, the chair of the board of the Jewish Federation, Albert Pra.